I won't.
Are you more a child than your mother? Do you think I am not haunted by these choices?
I must fulfill this dormant precept. The Kalimos sequence has begun, and it cannot be undone.
The sodding indifference seeks a path through the walls, and then, Tenno, through you!
Hey all, Siege here, and today I want to discuss those who've attempted to stand up to the power of the void and the dark side of love within Warframe, of Albrecht and Entrati, and perhaps most important, his own indifference, but this time, I'm not referring to his other. It's a point continuously made by the character, showing just how deeply he believes in his convictions.
All is in readiness. Lloyd will do as he is bid, though his eyes silently plead with me to choose another path. As I await my final crossing to the past, I ponder what role a scientist may play in so spiritual a matter as absolution. How in the alchemy of the soul, even repentance must necessarily be a calculated task. I will repair what I have broken, no more, no less. The scales must balance, and in such a monstrous penitence as this, I shall take no heed of the dust that may fall upon them on either side, the dust of petty lives. The builders of old tempered their mortar with blood to appease the most ancient of land spirits. We should have been so wise, yet it is not too late to learn.
A behavior those closest to him seem all too familiar with. With some of those, the emotional responses of which appear to be manifesting in harsh and even malevolent rhetoric, adding fuel to the mounting evidence fire that seems to support an idea that, in one way or another, strong emotions attract the man on the wall. And I believe there's an aspect of Entrati that isn't being fully understood, not just by those within the labs, but the community as a whole. Because when it comes to the idea of indifference, or the concept of having no particular interest or sympathy in a particular thing, Entrati attempts to explain that his intentions concerning his adversary don't adequately convey the importance of what he's actually asking of the Drifter, and by extension the Hex and all the residents of Hulvania. That choosing indifference and feeling indifference are two very different things, and one of them may in fact be the only weapon he's come to find that actually has any true effect, perhaps even based upon his own experience, personally, scientifically, and perhaps even within the arcane. Fortunately, he may not be alone. Now, I need to stress that the actions of Entrati, the willing sacrifice of countless creatures.
I employed a variety of cavia in an attempt to unmake the adversary. The principle was straightforward enough, though in hindsight I abhor my naivete. My humanity had been unscrolled by the caustic void, and now smirked back at me across the divide, privy to all my unfettered malice and pettiness. In answer, I resolved to hurl into the void minds that were not human. Let it parody them. The proximity of the bestial would force a humbling devolution. Or so I thought. The majority of the cavia merely died. I gave the void living beings, and it sent me back bedraggled cadavers. The dead lay stacked in pyramids around my deserted lab. I was nothing but a failed priest.
One in particular ending a species in its entirety. That probably encapsulates all of the multiverse, by the way, by taking the mate of the only two of their kind, once called Servilites, although that name will now only be understood in text at some very near point. But I would argue an even greater overall matter he's responsible for, in the idea that maybe, just maybe, his persistence in this belief in the void as an energy source, or perhaps worse, just as a way to prove his cynics wrong, should have never been meddled with in the first place. And belief may have been the problem from the very start. Albrecht's clear infatuation with not just science, but also the occult, unspoken by Entrati, yet bellowed by the very name and conduct of the Murmurer, his encounter brought about, certainly adds an additional angle to the untimed door and what he found. Can we really be sure this indifference is science and not, say, much closer to the answer to a prayer? In truth, indifference in its own right is not a foreign concept in many positions of science. In some, even a necessary aspect of it. Emotional ties to any theory or idea prevent one from potentially seeing the truth of a situation or experiment due to an unconscious bias such a thing inherently produces. And this can manifest in terrible ways, even if the intention was for the betterment of all. Animal testing, the development of many of the world's most destructive and mystifying marvels, even the medical industry itself, all required sacrifices for a perceived greater good. Although that understanding is usually considered through the obviously skewed viewpoint of those with the power to enact such things. After all, there's only so much one can learn from theoretical equations, strong hypotheses, and, in the case of medicine, especially within its infancy, cadavers and rudimentary as well as unsanitary tools of the era. A need for bodies far too often was no different from what Entrati himself described in his own effort to combat the indifference. And perhaps he and they were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they never stopped to think if they should. Now, you could always make the argument of look what their sacrifices brought about, especially when considering that the wonders of modern medicine were only possible because of those martyrs for the cause. I would also be forced to then counter, is it morally correct for their suffering to exist so that future generations might live a better life? But that opinion is, of course, subjective. Understanding early pregnancy was especially difficult, yet many would deem imperative for the future of the species. And in that mindset, I wonder, now that many of you've made a connection with the Hex, be it in a romantic way or even as friends, would you be willing to sacrifice them for the greater good? How about the Lotus? Given the dialogue present during Lotus Eaters, from the Drifter's perspective,
You, my child, the great indifference wants to take. I want to let it. I feel only the call.
what about the Operator Child? While an interesting and potentially forthcoming conundrum indeed, this is essentially the very thing Albrecht is explicitly asking the Drifter and you to consider and even embrace during the Hex quest specifically. In fact, I would make the argument that, while not substantiated, Albrecht originally left the Origin system for this exact reason, placing himself in the same kind of recursive loop the Operator was subjected to within the New War. Entrati possessing Hellman technology that Ballas originally developed and appeared to mostly monopolize, in ways insinuates that it's very likely the two of them, both scientists or maybe more aptly alchemists, in at least some capacity traded technologies and information to some degree. It allowed for Ballas and Narmer to rule for decades? Centuries? Although we don't know how long the Tenno were trapped, the entire takeover of the Origin system likely suggests Narmer rule had been in place for a long time when the Drifter finally made his way back into the Origin system. And it's only through the emergence of a kind of unseen aid to the Drifter, in the end plucking them from their place in Deviri to help the ailing Origin system, as under the rule of Narmer, the general population, or at least what's left of it, had become, honestly, no different than the Tech-Rot and Infested alike, all having similar mantras, no less, and removing the only thing that makes reality work for any of us, the ability to choose. It also strangely resembles another very known adage.
The sands fall, the circuit completes. I return to the place of the beginning. Let witless hordes bleat their disdain for every fervent plan. The deal is done, the die is cast. I end as I began.
In fact, during Whispers in the Walls, Fibonacci himself offers us an exceptionally cryptic, and I'm guessing largely passed over, piece of dialogue.
The sodding indifference seeks a path through the walls, and then, Tenno, through you!
Occurring in the midst of the struggle against the fragmented murmur, that I believe has been completely ignored due to how easily it seems to happen with everyone else. The idea that it succeeded. Something that doesn't get much attention these days, but was once so imperative to the sake of reality, is the now apparently completed Kalimo sequence. Confirmation of such being provided to those who successfully ranked the Hex Syndicate after the original quest was completed. This coming in the wake of the Drifter being told that the only way to save them was
not unless you know them.
To ease their pain and build a level of trust necessary for the transference required, much like the other Warframes the Tenno have helped, giving them our strength to save themselves, each in their own way. But this character who appears here with a lack of any kind of injury, shown 2 times shortly before this encounter, heavily injured, puts into question who exactly was telling us this information, and given that the Drifter seems to also take on the problems of others at a moment's notice, a trait they share with the Operator, in some cases, perhaps it's time for both to start asking some questions themselves, much like the Hex have consistently done of them, before rushing into action. Now, I think it's important to point out that if this is the true Entrati and what he wants, what he had always planned, it's a rather stark change from the earlier desire to destroy and not only all members of the Hex, but also an undisclosed amount of space within Halvania, and perhaps much, much more. The existence of a small section of 1999 showing up in the Origin System's reality for the Coda Worm engagements, in conjunction with a heavy amount of planetary debris, potentially insinuates much more of Halvania was taken with it, in at least one reality. And with the connection to the Hex being necessary to complete the original Kalimo sequence, well, it offers more evidence that it may not have ever been Entrati who enacted this clarion call of sorts in the first place. The 1999 ARG, in many ways an essential aspect to the full story of this campaign, proved that, at least at times, and very possibly all the time, Entrati's own operating system was and continues to be undoubtedly in league with, or was being directly controlled by, the Man in the Wall himself, even visualized multiple times during the campaign. And with it being so crucial to the Palm 2, as well as this icon being interspersed throughout the expanse of literally every iteration of computer we've seen, with screens not only permeating throughout 1999, but in Entrati's labs as well, not to mention all the current residents of said sanctum having themselves had direct interaction.
The chamber is sealed. Prepare for saturation. I've done all I can. Increasing saturation! Their levels of decay aren't shifting. Pushing to maximum! I'm sorry. I tried. I daren't open the chamber. The radiation in you. I don't know what.
Is there nothing?
We're done, Fish. No point in howling about it.
Just gonna sit down. Will we be like men now?
We'll all get to meet her, Bird. Don't you worry about nothing. You can talk her ear off, and she'll love you for it. Bird? Bird?
Tack for...
It's not your fault, Fib. We just played the hand we were dealt as best we could. Not your fault. None of our fault. Fib? So long, Fish. Lloyd, you did good.
Bad comedy. Their void contamination levels are dropping. Of course. Huzzah. At least I'll be able to bury... Their contamination levels haven't dropped. They've... alchemized. You were dead.
I guess it didn't take. There's definitely some weird crap going on with us right now. You want to explain this?
In some capacity with the void entity, puts efforts into making certain the sequence completes under these circumstances, knowing and connecting with each of the proto-frames. Well, it seems to the discerning eye, at least, to be more in line with what our dear Wally wants than Entrati, pure and simple. And again, when looking at all of this in the larger perspective, it starts to make one consider if the Indifference's desire to help Ballas achieve his goals by directing the operator around, facilitating the paracesis transfer, helping to muddy the operator's feelings for the Lotus during the prelude to war.
Mine. The Oracle are gone. The bios are divided, infighting over what remains. Only the Tenno.
The Tenno. The enemy.
Yes.
Made by you. To kill us.
Yes.
Essentially that once Ballas decides to destroy the Origin system, something that he would only desire to do due to the emergence of a Tenno who could challenge him.
What does it matter? You have won. Norma spreads across the system. Monuments rise to your glory. All who live, bios and not, kneel before you. But not them!
You see some great triumph here? That this dullard herd worships me, wailing freedom from their rotten gobs. When the truth is, they all thirst for that piss-warm comfort of being told what to think. They wanted to kneel.
But not them.
That this was to be the beacon that either intentionally or not brought the Indifference in its full form into our plane of reality. From there, it's not hard to see how its own influence on entities within the Sanctum may have given it the perfect means to contact the very Tenno that was able to force Ballas's endgame, one it helped facilitate and end when it deemed necessary. And it's here where I propose that while we don't know when the Indifference infected Entrati's operating system, one that seems to require a connection itself of dubious nature, along a non-negotiable connection through time itself, implied by Kaya Velasco in her own research into Entrati's understanding of time travel, it's more than possible, or there's at least enough evidence to suggest here, that we were contacted to complete the sequence, not by Albrecht, but by his other. The likely reason whispers in the walls, where we are offered a message itself off the back of a void-interfered transference that between segments seems more important with the new context we have. It may explain why a supposedly recorded message can somehow differentiate who it's addressing.
Arthur? Tenno. Forgive me.
Curiously recorded from inside the sanctum as well. And while Albrecht is supposedly locked in the past, remember, there is a version of him it is not, and the Indifference having some level of influence within the sanctum would also offer a much better explanation as to why Lloyd would want to continue to follow the message.
In the version of the past we saw, my Albrecht said we were too late. The solution, naturally, is to arrive on time next time.
He knew and saw was in line with what he himself recognized as not being Albrecht.
You are late.
So, Albrecht made it to 1999 in one piece. But that thing is still on his heels. Albrecht rarely smiled after his return from the void. And never like that. I smashed the casket for nothing! It followed him anyway!
It forces us to re-examine exactly when his own interaction with the void occurred. I would make the case that the constructs within the sanctum being unable to distinguish between Albrecht and Wally would probably make this a challenge for the operating system as well, and would also offer the incredibly convenient delivery of the key glyph from Tagfer required for the message to be received and continued pursuit of the Kalimo sequence, something even Lloyd comments on and oddly warns us of, if nothing more, a more plausible explanation than just a normal MacGuffin required for a video game quest. What actions can truly be considered any of their own, with Lloyd or the Cavia? With the aforementioned visual confirmation in the Hex quest, as well as what seems like, by all rights, the Void saving the Cavia
Alchemized.
from radiation sickness, one that would have claimed the lives of all three. But now, even the banter between them in conjunction with Lloyd's continued warnings may have always been a kind of proof of concept in real time. Even trying to persuade the Tenno to be cautious and trusting them, but using it as a kind of reverse psychology, perhaps already aware of our nature to follow certain requests, usually ones we typically don't have a personal stake in, at all costs, from our own documented or even observed behavior. It really didn't take much for us to come to the Necrolisk in the middle of the night, did it? We were also hungry for content, hungry to explore. Consider even the tone of the Drifter's perspective when speaking on the entirety of the situation. I really don't know anything for sure. I just know there was a sequence, Entrati had a plan, and it involved me here, now. I needed to get here to meet you all. Not unlike a beat cop almost, taking his assignment from the sergeant. And this is exactly what occurs within Entrati's eldritch-looking labs as well. They find a grimoire that's obviously not normal and just, pick it up. Then, of course, they just transfer into an entirely different host than ever before, outside from maybe the aura worm. But even then, it's forced onto the operator. Not done of their own volition with a computer hack that doesn't typically work in this way, facilitating the connection. And certainly what came next would fit that description as well, as our trip caused by an interference by the murmur would, through no intention of our own, result in the Indifference meeting us there in 1999. Now, do you think that's a coincidence? As kind of a side thought, did the operator ever once consider the possible negative implications of any of these actions? Do they ever consider that in any of their actions? Well, unfortunately now, much like with Entrati's own regret at opening the untimed door in the first place, we may come to feel the same. Because it's from this point in the Warframe overarching narrative that whatever lock, space, or barrier that had kept it out before was apparently gone, with the Indifference essentially using the connections the proto-frames had to their origin system vessel counterpart. And we allowed it in. Now, I have a personal and unsubstantiated thought that is, of course, predicated on the pretense that Albrecht first still remains somewhere, uncorrupted, and understand, I'm not so sure about that. But if we're all comfortable with accepting that as current truth, I think because of what happened in that moment, everything Albrecht had originally planned was altered. His own recursive timeline was now infected with the Indifference, with he and the Drifters supposedly trapped here, at least according to his words, but with the Void seemingly here as well. And in my opinion, it was here that Albrecht felt he must yet again do what he must over what he desired. And given the context of both his messages to the Tenno in game and through his lost notes,
I went among the denizens of the plague year like a savior, my hands filled with healing. To those who volunteered, I brought more than mere health. Their bodies were primed. It needed only the Helminth infusions brought from my own time to work the alchemy of transformation. They have become partial warframes, still in possession of their free will, yet enhanced, void-attuned, capable. Their humanity may not last. My deliverance may yet consume them, the human swallowed up in the sacred beast. And if my wayward disciples turn on me, what words of comfort shall I have beyond? This is the bargain we have made. Through our sacrifice, history will be saved.
I think the death of the Hex in 1999 may in fact transfer their living consciousness into the very weapons he began building so long ago, finally giving these large, abandoned things the purpose he always deemed for them. And it's largely why I believe the Kalimos sequence was created by Entrati. But like everything else in this universe, it's most likely just as corrupted by the raging void, one that seems to be particularly angry at a very specific group of people.
These gifts you have, a piece of me, given freely. But those before you were butchers, flayed flesh for stolen stars. But those before you, they did not ask. They butchered me. My flesh fed their greed.
I got us into this, and if it kills me, I feel you worthy.
You know, choosing indifference is not the same as being indifferent. I believe it's why Entrati chose to do what he did in the past in leaving the origin system. He didn't want to. In his eyes, he felt he had to. It's why I believe he chose to write the information that he wanted to say to Lloyd within the grimoire versus saying it to him. Had he, his emotions would have been made a target right then and there. This was one aspect of the advice he gave Lloyd, and I'm inclined to believe at this point that all three of the choices at the end of Whispers are correct. It's really what you want to hear in that instant that is the information you're offered. Remarkably, though, he's not the only one who's utilized this as a weapon against the Void. And I'd make the argument another was much more successful.
In the splendid lands on this side of the wall lives happy Mathila, and she has 2 children. She also had a husband in her yesterdays. When I have attempted to talk to her about him, she has simply frozen, like a rat before a snake. His name was Garmy, and he was keeper of the Seraglass Lighthouse on Watcher's Island. The lighthouse served no true purpose, yet he kept its lamp burning, beaming out into the void as if to call travelers home. Now, before his death, Garmy confided in me that he felt his role was important. He was keeping it at bay. Void storms were not unknown in Duviri, but the storm I shall speak of was unlike others. It hung in a red veil across the sky. There was a great sound like tearing metal, and all at once, a pelting rain fell. Not water, but broken metal chains in lengths and coils and great rattling whip strands. The falling chains shattered roofs and windows, slashed through screaming livestock, and maimed the fools who had not come in from the streets. I found Garmy's log in the toppled ruin of the lighthouse. With admirable presence of mind, he describes a form steadily approaching out of the void. A monstrous hand, possessed of only 3 fingers and a thumb. With the lighthouse gone, Watcher's Island crumbled, and was gone too within 3 spirals. Garmy has no grave nor memorial, as if he had never lived. But I remember, and so I record.
With so much additional context years after the Chains of Harrow, I believe the story of Rell can be a bit more fleshed out now, as well as his greater role in the grand Warframe narrative. Like the Lotus, I too at one point questioned the validity of Rell's existence, but now, based on what information does exist in his regard, I want to believe that he might have been much more important in the struggle against the Void than I, or maybe even the whole community, ever gave him credit for. From the dialogue posited during Chains of Harrow itself, the Rell webcomic, and taking into consideration the physical reemergence specifically afterwards, strong evidence suggests that Rell either had a part in or was himself responsible for the plan for the Man in the Wall's slumber.
How could Rell have lived this long without the long dream?
In a way, he didn't. He knew his mortality would undo his purpose, so he gave up his humanity forever. He committed his soul to the undying vessel.
His Warframe.
Yes, he commanded we chain it within the depths of the sacred temple, an eternal vigil against the Indifference.
What makes this even more interesting is that Rell did not have access to the dream, the one that shielded the Tenno from the voices taking hold. No, it was his own, what many have come to understand as an autistic nature, that allowed him to not only recognize the Void entity for what it was, but also beat it at its own game. See, information largely alludes that the parents aboard the Zeraman turning mad while being exposed to the Void was not an accident.
Happy. Mama has a stretchy smile.
No, it was in fact meant to force the children, the true target of the Indifference, into a highly emotional state and presumably take a bad deal, in an effort to counter and supposedly save everyone on board. The interaction shown between the Tenno and the Void entity in the new war is missing a lot of context and key details regarding the nature of the deal, or even what the operator was asked for originally, for what will most likely be obvious reasons at some point. Was he only referring to the Tenno children or the entirety of the ship? Did their actions influence those that perhaps did not engage with the indifference? Well, I believe Rell's comic makes the case that the gift bestowed upon him by the other, due to his unique perspective, was magnified to an unimaginable amount, one that would offer him void fire, and yet allow him to seem almost impervious to the whims of the void. This, along with his already highly functioning intellect, especially with the nuances of space-time and the void itself, would create, dare I say, the perfect foil to what we have come to realize is a very hungry void. With an uncanny fascination to highly emotional states, the thing the Orkin themselves made sure to caution all to heed when in the presence of, even and perhaps especially to young children. What I find more interesting is, within the fragments of Duviri, we almost certainly see the other side of Rell's story, where he takes on the name Garmy. Now, as mentioned earlier, provided that we know Entrati himself made it to Duviri, it gives us a very interesting connection and throughway to a lingering question I've had since Chains of Hera released. Who gave Rell a Warframe? It's not like they're just sitting around and they're not easy to get. For instance, Parvos Granum, a highly influential person within the Corpus, was only given a Protea Warframe due to his work with Spectre technology, something the Orkin found very desirable. The point of what I'm saying here is, Warframes aren't just given out to everybody. So with that in mind, while not a fact, I'd say given their aligning goals here, Entrati would make the most sense. And I'd wager he was probably the one who provided Rell passage to Duviri as well, at least in some manner. After all, Entrati himself took on a different persona, being known as the Scholar in Duviri. So, would it be that much of a stretch for Rell to do the same? In fact, Palladino's dialogue when trying to contact him via seance is largely in line with how Akrathis describes Duviri, worlds on either side of the wall, with Palladino and her elders most likely getting this teaching from what they believe the person now calling himself Garmy on the other side is. But obviously for them, still using his earthly name for the sake of their rituals and, dare I say, religion.
Veil rituals will incite fanaticism, but don't be drawn in. I'm not convinced this Rell even exists.
Why would Margulis single out Rell and not admit him with the rest of the Tenno? Well, while I can't say this for certain, I'm beginning to think more and more that the reason is because Rell may have had a more intense connection than we were led to believe originally. I can't help but highlight a specific aspect of the new war that appears to mirror the Chains of Hera in a very unsettling manner, as well as provide an answer to a question I've always had about the scene we were given showing the Tenno's first encounter with our dear Wally aboard the doomed Zeraman. I always admired, yet never truly understood, our Tenno's iron will in the situation. The ship is clearly lost. The parents are outside the room, clawing their way in to kill their own children. Heck, you can even see horrific drawings all over the walls, even within the classroom. Screams and growls permeate the area, yet our Tenno is in complete control. No panic at all. While the rest of the room is locked in sheer terror, our Tenno is not. Even the manner by which the operator handles the first interaction with the indifference, as well as the deal with the proverbial devil, if you will. Fear doesn't seem to be something they feel at all. Excitement? terror? They barely acknowledge anything happening around them as nothing more than business as usual. And it's curious that our Tenno, specifically, is the only one in the room who is also engaged by the indifference. Now, this flashback does show us one aspect of the bargain we supposedly made.
Time's up, kiddo. I can save them. All of them.
And the dialogue is the same wording Palladino uses when describing Rell.
He's kept us, all of us, safe for so long, and it's time for you to carry on.
But the man in the wall, who will...
They will have to. All of them. They owe you this. We all do.
When describing the task that Rell had decided to take on. A very specific coincidence? In multiple scenarios, it's shown that Tenno can take on the memories of others, even believing themselves to be personally involved with events that they would have had absolutely no part in originally, such as with Umbra and what he did to his own son upon becoming a Warframe. Something the man on the wall himself makes sure to comment on at the end of the quest.
I killed him. Isa. Did you now? Is that how you remember it? Yes. Good.
Is it possible Rell was the one who made the original deal with the man on the wall, with all of us being the beneficiaries of his sacrifice? Rell's very nature would line up with his behavior during that interaction, as well as his stoic and confident tone in the webcomic when dealing with both his altered mother, as well as being left to the void on his own. This heightened connection may have been what Margulis originally tried to isolate the rest of the children from, herself knowing full well about the voices. And maybe Rell is the actual inspiration for Ballas's uncharacteristic fear of the Tenno, if this was his first encounter with one. And when Rell himself instructed those within the Red Veil to chain him to his Warframe, he was no longer just himself. And while I won't say for certain that entity was a clone or hollow copy, I would stress that we may find out in the future that was exactly the case. But I think it's even possible that this too was part of the plan that he and maybe Albrecht had utilized to keep the Indifference at bay. Now, I don't pretend to know exactly what transpired to produce such a serendipitous and long-lasting calm to the Indifference while the children slept all this time, but the events of the Chains of Harrow largely insinuate that at some point, Rell was able to trap himself within the Warframe Harrow and thus keep the Void entity restrained. But I think there's more to it that allows for the actual events of the story. Now understand, this is all speculation, attempting mainly to bridge the gap between spaces in our understanding. But given Albrecht's ability to procure Warframes and his knowledge of the Tenno, I think it's possible they were able to potentially formulate a plan together. In the same manner Entrati never explains how he was able to reach Deviri, I'm guessing a similar way may exist for Rell to make it there. And it's possible his other was the one trapped, with Rell potentially transferring his uncorrupted, emotionally mastered consciousness out of the frame at the moment the seals were put in place, and quietly slipped into Deviri with Albrecht to live a largely normal life with his newfound family. Now, the Indifference does seem to enjoy inhabiting the vessels, but I wonder if the very reason we never see him in a Warframe is because he doesn't want to be trapped again. This is, of course, what the quest itself was trying to convey. That the entity was somehow neutralized, or if nothing else, significantly dampened from our reality through the use of this Harrow, a dark priest no less. Very Entrati-like, with oddly specific abilities to chain any entity to the very ground they stand. That seems intentional to me, given what it was most likely created for, this very thing, and utilized by two individuals with ample understanding of the Indifference, maybe more so than any two people in the history of the Warframe universe, especially given the last page for the Rell comic. And perhaps he figured him out. So much so that upon the Tenno destroying the chains per Palladino's guidance, well, it seems at least that this was the moment the binding they had enacted failed, and the indifference, it came for him first.
The falling chains shattered roofs and windows, slashed through screaming livestock, and maimed the fools who had not come in from the streets. I found Garmi's log in the toppled ruin of the lighthouse. With admirable presence of mind, he describes a form steadily approaching out of the void. A monstrous hand possessed of only 3 fingers and a thumb. With the lighthouse gone, Watcher's Island crumbled, and was gone too, within 3 spirals.
But weren't we helping Rell? Well, in paying attention to Palladino specifically in numerous areas, she very plainly states,
Tenno, something's wrong. That's not Rell. That's...
The opening transmission to the Tenno as well is essentially fishing for someone to take the call, being merely a recording of Palladino talking to Rell. No cry for help. It's an all call to every syndicate using the Red Veil as a vessel, a memory. In fact, during Chains of Harrow, most of the interactions we get regarding Rell are, in fact, memories. And this is something the Man on the Wall likes to utilize. Having had some direct interaction with Rell himself, he would be able to mimic or even control him in theory. Although, I'm guessing the Indifference had a much tougher time doing this with Rell than with other Tenno. And I think it was dangled as a kind of lure to allow the void to be in prison. But after waking up,
Hey kiddo, what took you so long?
his slumber ended. And I'm guessing at least it's most likely him that sent or directly influenced the distress call. Did you notice no one else seemed to show up? And given the timing of this happening after the War Within, well, it's most likely that we were the ones, by just jumping into danger without any real information that inadvertently undid all the work Rell and perhaps Entrati had already established. If I haven't made it clear already, many parts of the Warframe saga have been brought about largely because the Tenno themselves were not able to choose Indifference when they probably needed to. And in quite a few ways, this is infinitely more difficult than just trying to swoop in and fix everything. Yet, oftentimes, a need to pull back and look at the greater picture is all we require. It's unfortunate that so often, those same individuals are blinded to the forest because of the trees. If this is something Entrati came to the understanding, that this resists, nullifies, or even halts the Indifference entirely within this universe, then all miracles really do appear to require a sacrifice.